You think you know how Camilla became queen. In 2005, under pale light, the Clarence House statement offered another future. The typed line said it was intended that she would use the title Princess Consort, a phrase designed to steady public feeling after years of royal damage. Then came 2023. Gold coronation paper carried different words. Queen Camilla. No vote had changed the memory. No public bargain had been reopened. The old promise was gone, replaced by ceremony. That was the hidden power of royal language. Guide expectation long enough, and the reversal arrives, dressed as tradition. Over 18 years, the language around Camilla moved like fog across a sealed document. In 2005, Clarence House said she was intended to be known as Princess Consort when Charles became king. The phrase sounded modest, almost temporary, and it helped guide public expectation after years of damage around Diana. In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II gave her public blessing for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort. One word remained as a cushion. Then in 2023, the coronation invitation carried the sharper form, Queen Camilla. The word consort faded from the line, as if it had never carried political weight. No national vote marked the change. No public bargain was reopened. The boundary moved by stages. A promise did not shatter in one blow. It softened, bent, and disappeared inside ceremony. The file had not closed. Its language had been quietly rewritten instead. Norman Baker entered this story from a different angle. He was not useful because he carried a single secret letter proving an order against Camilla. Method mattered most. As a former member of Parliament and former Home Office minister, he knew government from inside. He had spent years questioning royal privilege, public money, and the junction between palace practice and official silence. A cold office light over his files gives the right image. Clauses marked, expenses traced, exemptions examined. Baker understood that monarchy rarely changes by open vote. It changes through wording, access, funding, convention, and pressure applied where ordinary citizens cannot see it. That made the criticism dangerous. He was describing a system, not a bedroom quarrel. In that system, the title question was never only about Camilla's personal dignity. It was about how an institution can guide expectation, wait for resistance to tire, and present the result as normal. His lens turns the palace from romance into machinery, where a line in a statement can become policy by patience, not by open consent. But Charles's arrangement contains one problem no palace wording can erase. Camilla holds the title now, yet she does not own the future that will judge it. That future stands with Prince William, the next king after Charles, and the son of Diana. In the dark, his outline can be read as succession itself. Still, waiting, unavoidable. Beside him, Catherine's sapphire ring carries another memory the public has never fully released. When Charles's reign ends, royal authority will move again, and the power to shape Camilla's place will sit in William's hands. That is the pressure under every softened title. Camilla gained the word queen, but not permanent control over its meaning. The decision waiting ahead belongs to a different reign and a different wound, not hers alone. To understand how that weakness began, the file must return to February 10, 2005, when one careful promise opened the door. In February 2005, Clarence House faced a public memory no announcement could remove. The images had not faded. Diana's television interview, the funeral flowers, the crowds who treated her loss as a national wound. Against that background, the idea of Queen Camilla was politically explosive. When the engagement news arrived, Clarence House was not only announcing a marriage. It was managing the emotional temperature of a country still measuring Charles through Diana. Palace faces could remain formal, but the problem was clear. If the public was asked to accept Camilla as queen at once, the wedding risked becoming a referendum on betrayal. The monarchy needed a phrase that sounded like restraint. It needed a pressure valve. That phrase would become Princess Consort, a title designed to calm anger without closing the future. The wording appeared with careful precision. Clarence House said that when Charles became king, Camilla was intended to use the title HRH, the Princess Consort. The key words were not decorative. It is intended did the work. Those words sounded firm enough for headlines, yet soft enough to leave space behind them. A pen striking that line into a statement was not writing humility, it was building delay. The title had no deep legal root in British royal practice. Its power came from public psychology, not constitutional force. It allowed supporters to say Diana had not been erased. It allowed critics to believe a boundary had been drawn. Most importantly, it allowed the palace to move the marriage forward without asking the country to accept the final destination. The public was offered a compromise. The institution kept its exit route. That was the trap inside the courtesy. The legal reality sat somewhere colder. Under the traditional principle often described through common law and royal convention, the wife of a reigning king becomes queen consort. A press statement could guide expectation, but it could not defeat that structure by itself. The contrast with Prince Philip mattered because the husband of a queen does not automatically become king. The wife of a king stands in a different constitutional pattern. Palace advisors knew that distinction. They also knew the public was not reading old legal authorities under cold library light. The promise worked because it sounded moral, not because it was binding. It soothed anger while time did the heavier work. Charles gained the marriage. Camilla gained a future path. And to understand the same instinct for power, the file must next follow Charles's pen as it reached into government itself. Norman Baker approached the monarchy less as theater than as machinery. His usefulness came from the years he spent inside Parliament and government, including the Home Office, where royal privilege touched administration, finance, and secrecy. From Whitehall, the palace did not look like a harmless national emblem. It looked like an institution skilled at moving through corridors most citizens never entered. Baker had built his public case around royal costs, exemptions, and transparency. Files, accounts, and old conventions mattered to him because they showed where power hid. Paper turned ceremonial language into enforceable advantage. The quietness was the method, not proof of innocence. That is why his warning carried weight. He was not claiming every royal action came from one plan. He was pointing to a pattern. Influence rarely needed a throne room when a private channel could reach the state more quietly. That pattern appeared in the letters later called the Black Spider Memos. Across 2004 and 2005, Charles sent 27 letters to government ministers. They were written in the dense, looping hand that gave them their nickname. They were not personal greetings. They pressed views on public questions, including agriculture, health, education, and other policy areas. Some subjects also raised questions about possible interests connected to the Duchy of Cornwall, the estate that funded the Prince of Wales. The issue was not that a future king had opinions. The issue was the route those opinions took. Constitutional monarchy depends on political neutrality, or at least the public appearance of it. Yet these letters showed the heir using access that no ordinary campaigner could claim. Ink became pressure. A private page became a corridor into government. The palace could call it concern, but ministers received it from the next sovereign. For Baker, the lesson was plain. A prince comfortable pressing ministers behind closed doors could also understand the value of wording that postponed public anger over Camilla. Bringing those letters into daylight took nearly a decade. The Guardian fought through the courts for their release, while officials resisted disclosure again and again. By 2015, the battle reached its result, and the letters were published after years of legal pressure. Outside the courts, the meaning was larger than one archive. The fight showed how hard the system worked to protect royal privacy when that privacy touched public power. Even if the letters were defended as harmless, the resistance made them look heavier to critics. Baker's wider argument gained a sharper edge. The fight had shown how strongly royal influence could be shielded until forced into view. Once that file opened, the title promise made in 2005 looked less like a permanent settlement and more like another controlled delay. Even before the letters were finally published, the fight had already pushed the system towards stronger secrecy, written into the rules themselves. As the fight over royal correspondence exposed the limits of transparency, the system moved towards stronger containment. The Freedom of Information framework was altered, so correspondence involving the sovereign and the heir received stronger exemption. It could be protected for 20 years from creation or 5 years after the relevant death, whichever came later. The image is not a debate chamber, but a gate closing at Buckingham Palace, iron meeting iron while the public stands outside. A red stamp falls over the file. Exempt. After the letter battle, the lesson became institutional. If private royal influence could be dragged into court once, future royal correspondence could be protected before journalists reached it. Anger had nowhere formal to land. The public could suspect influence, but the machinery now protected the evidence from timely scrutiny. Secrecy was no longer an embarrassment. It had been written into administrative protection. That change made delay itself another form of power. A similar imbalance appears in Baker's own account of alleged broadcast pressure. He said St. James's Palace reacted after he challenged the transparency of the Duchy of Cornwall on television. In the studio, the issue sounded public: land, revenue, privilege, and accountability. Then the scene shifts to the quieter instrument of power, a phone call beyond the viewer's sight. In Baker's telling, an apology followed, suggesting how palace access could carry unusual weight inside an editorial room. The point is not melodrama, it is access. A citizen must complain through ordinary channels. A palace can make concern arrive with a different weight. Under dim studio lights, a presenter can correct, soften, or retreat while the audience never sees the pressure behind the line. For a media organization, that hidden pressure can reshape the next question before it is asked. That is the asymmetry Baker wanted exposed. The monarchy did not need to silence every critic. It only needed enough shortcuts to make criticism more expensive, more nervous, and more easily contained. Seen beside those mechanisms, the vanishing of Princess Consort looks less mysterious. The Black Spider file and the Camilla title file suggest a similar royal pattern. Shape the environment. Wait for resistance to tire and let the new result feel normal. One side shows ministers and records moving behind legal walls. The other shows a 2005 promise fading under time until its protective wording lost force. No grand correction was required. The palace understood patience. A word could be introduced to calm outrage, then allowed to weaken as public memory shifted. That is how soft power works when wrapped in ceremony and legal tradition. It does not always announce reversal. It adjusts the room until reversal sounds like common sense by degrees. The mechanism had begun. Now the palace needed years to make the old promise lose its teeth. One postponed question, one sealed file, one softened line at a time. From 2005 onward, the palace did not try to make Camilla loved overnight. It made her familiar. The old phrase Princess Consort stayed on paper, aging quietly, while the living woman appeared again and again beside Charles. At Trooping the Color, at receptions, at state banquets, and in royal photographs, her presence moved from exception to routine. The earlier strategy, often described around Operation PB, had trained the palace in slow repetition. It was the long effort to make Camilla Parker Bowles publicly acceptable. Early headlines that had treated her as a source of scandal began making room for softer language. Duty, support, steadiness, service. That did not erase Diana from public memory. It placed another image beside her day after day until resistance had less oxygen. The palace understood the psychology of repetition. A figure once rejected can become part of the national furniture if she is shown often enough. The old question does not need to be asked too loudly. That was the quiet method. Charity work gave that repetition moral cover. Camilla took on causes around literacy, domestic abuse, health, osteoporosis, and support for vulnerable women. In hospitals, schools, libraries, and shelters, the camera found a different story from the old triangle of Charles, Diana, and Camilla. She read with children, spoke to campaigners, met survivors, and attached her name to work that could not be dismissed as empty ceremony. This mattered because public judgment needed new material. A royal image cannot survive on denial alone. It needs useful scenes for newspapers to print. Warm rooms, books, handshakes, and applause gave editors another frame. From a strategic view, the effect was clear. Camilla became harder to reduce to the affair. She became useful to the monarchy. And usefulness changes how institutions defend a person. The past remained, but the daily record grew thicker. Each engagement added another layer between the public and the older anger, and made her easier to defend publicly. The palace did not have to announce a new verdict. It had to make the old verdict feel incomplete. Yet acceptance was never the same as reverence. For many people, Diana remained the moral wound against which Camilla would be measured. One half of the screen could show Camilla waving from a carriage in jewels and tailored confidence. The other half still held Diana's eyes on television, the interview, the funeral flowers, the unfinished grief. That split did not vanish because courtiers improved scheduling. Some accepted the marriage. Some respected the charitable work. Others kept the princess consort promise as the last emotional boundary around Diana's memory. They could tolerate Camilla as Charles's wife, but queen was a different word. By early 2022, the image work had hardened, but one barrier still stood. That final step required higher moral cover. To cross it, Charles needed more than public familiarity. He needed public permission from the one figure whose approval could make the final shift harder to challenge. In her Accession Day message in February 2022, the final barrier began to weaken. Queen Elizabeth II marked her Platinum Jubilee with a message that sounded gentle, almost grandmotherly. Yet one line changed the title file. She wrote that it was her sincere wish that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. No statute was created. No parliamentary vote followed. The force came from moral authority. The monarch who had steadied Britain for 7 decades was giving public cover to the arrangement Clarence House had once avoided. Charles did not need to argue with the old promise anymore. His mother had placed her name above the new expectation. The word consort remained, but the old princess consort expectation had been weakened. A private problem had received the highest blessing available. After that, resistance could be framed as disrespect toward the queen herself. On September 8, 2022, Balmoral turned the promise into legal reality. Queen Elizabeth died, and the crown passed instantly to Charles. In that same moment, Camilla became Queen Consort under the long structure of law and convention. The change did not wait for ceremony. It moved faster than grief, faster than newspaper explanation, faster than any public argument could gather. Flags fell to half-mast while broadcasters repeated the new titles in careful voices. Camilla appeared in mourning black, but the position around her had altered beyond return. The title still held one cushion: consort. That word preserved a narrow layer of respect around the dead queen and around the memory of the earlier bargain. Yet the substance had already shifted. Charles was king. Camilla was queen consort. The legal machinery had done what no press office could safely announce in 2005. It had moved the country from intention to fact without opening a debate. The door was not pushed open by speech. It opened because succession itself had turned the lock. Then came April 2023, and the word consort fell away. The coronation invitation used the name Queen Camilla, printed in gold beside the king. Legally, the removal of consort changed less than it seemed. Psychologically, it changed the whole surface. The word that had once softened the arrangement was no longer needed on the public document. A golden card had done what years of careful language prepared. It made the shorter title look official, elegant, and settled. Princess Consort now belonged to the archive, while Queen Consort became a passing stage, not the final form. The palace did not need a dramatic announcement. It only needed the invitation to appear. 3 steps had completed the movement: moral cover, legal succession, and ceremonial shortening. No vote, no public hearing, no open reckoning. Yet the trust broken by that printed title would not be so easily sealed again. 18 years of title management passed without a public vote. No referendum opened. No parliamentary debate asked taxpayers whether the promise of Princess Consort still mattered. In the imagined silence of the House of Commons, green benches sit empty while palace officials approve wording elsewhere. The decision reaches London streets only afterward, folded into morning papers and broadcast lines. That gap is the moral problem. Legally, Britain did not need a national ballot to settle the title of a king's wife. But a promise once used to calm public feeling carried an obligation of explanation. When that promise changed, the palace offered ceremony instead of accountability. The public was asked to accept the result as settled. The silence around that change said more than any statement. The ballot box stayed closed, while palace language kept moving in private. Trust had been treated as a managed asset, not a living bond. A crown can establish legal status, but it cannot command affection. By law and convention, Camilla became queen beside Charles. That fact stands. Yet emotional legitimacy lives somewhere less obedient. On one side, Camilla could appear on the balcony in full royal dress, smiling above the crowd beneath the palace stone. On the other, some faces below stayed guarded, some signs carried objection, and some eyes turned away. The split mattered because Diana's memory had never been only private grief. For many, it remained a moral measure applied to every step Camilla took upward. Nearly 2 decades of duties, patronages, and public service gave Camilla a broader record. They did not grant automatic forgiveness. The palace could print the title, announce it, and place it in the order of service. People still decided what that word meant inside themselves. That was the limit of institutional power. It could arrange recognition, but not devotion. The crown solved status. It did not settle memory for everyone. It could crown a woman without healing the story around her. By turning a promise into flexible language, the palace won the title battle and deepened a trust problem. The wound was not only about Camilla. It was about whether public reassurance from the monarchy could later be revised without public reckoning. Outside palace gates, an older woman placing a fading white rose becomes the quiet image of that injury. She leaves it there and walks away. Behind stone walls, Charles could see a completed settlement, yet the moral foundation under it had shifted. A name on paper did not erase the way it arrived. The monarchy had chosen control over conversation, and control leaves residue. Suspicion gathers slowly, waiting for the next reign to test it. That is where the title question stops being settled history. Charles seemed to have won. But time moves power onward. One day, the pen will belong to William, the son who walked behind Diana's coffin. When Charles's reign ends, the authority around the crown will pass to William with almost brutal simplicity. The royal prerogative can be expressed through instruments such as letters patent. It gives the monarch power over styles and certain royal titles, though not every title works the same way. One royal document can change a status that once looked protected by birth inside the palace hierarchy itself. The Andrew precedent showed the public how sharp royal authority on paper could be. In 2025, Charles initiated the formal process to remove Andrew's style, titles, and honors. The act did not need a national referendum to carry symbolic force. It showed that the family itself can be reorganized from the top. William watched a crown defend itself through paper, not battle. When that same pen reaches him, he will inherit more than ceremony. He will inherit the power to shape who remains visible, active, and supported inside the royal system. That does not mean William could easily erase Camilla's title with a single dramatic stroke. Queen Dowager would normally be associated with her status as the widow of a king. That position is not the same as an ordinary courtesy title, but monarchy also runs on access, visibility, funding, and official memory. A new king can shape those things without announcing punishment. A portrait can move into shadow. A public diary can carry fewer engagements. Invitations to state banquets can shrink. Public duties can be reduced until presence becomes absence. Staff, budgets, residences, appearances, and ceremonial roles all depend on decisions made inside the royal household. That is where power can become nearly invisible. Camilla could keep rank while losing atmosphere. The title might remain, while the public role becomes smaller under the next sovereign over time. William could also influence how the broken princess consort promise is handled in official narrative. He may choose restraint for stability, yet restraint can still confine. A quiet reign can limit how much space a figure receives in official royal memory. No one can know how William will use that authority. The safer evidence lies in the symbols he has already chosen. At 15, he walked behind Diana's coffin while the country watched a child perform duty before grief. Years later, he placed Diana's sapphire engagement ring on Catherine's hand, carrying his mother's image into the future monarchy. His daughter bears the name Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, a public thread between crown, grandmother, and memory. These gestures do not prove revenge. They prove remembrance with discipline. William stands between three pressures: loyalty to Diana, respect for his father's reign, and the stability of the institution he will inherit. He is unlikely to act from impulse, but he can decide which memories receive light. The clock keeps moving toward that moment. One generation bent a promise with a pen. Another may judge it with the same instrument. The monarchy showed it could weaken a public promise without opening a national debate. Charles's gold pen signed one version of history, while the old Clarence House statement was pushed into the archive. But dynasties have a rule colder than ceremony. Every pen is inherited. The power Charles holds today will one day pass to William. William's future reign will carry Diana's memory through Catherine's sapphire ring and through the choices he makes. Camilla received the title. Charles secured the wording. Yet history is not finished with either of them. The next file may be opened by Diana's son when his reign begins.